Let me just tell you a little bit about the partnership as we wait to see if there's some more people coming in. If you're new to the partnership, we're we like to think we're the premier 17th century New England and uh, connections back, because I'm from New England here in Boston, Massachusetts, New England 17th century history, and also the connections back to England, to Boston. That's why we're called the Partnership of the Historic Bostons, plural, Boston, Massachusetts, and Momtown, Boston, England. We're probably actually the only 17th century New England history organization, but we like to think we're also the premier. And we do all sorts of events, both in Zoom and live events. Tonight, we're actually starting somewhat earlier, at least in court by New England and United States time. We're starting at 6 in the evening. But for Natalie, who you can see there, um, Natalie Kershaw is in England. And at the moment, it's 6 o'clock and 5 hours, or 11 at night. So she's been all revved up with tea and coffee and just the passion of talking about all of this stuff. So let me tell you a little bit about Natalie and about the format we're going to use for this evening. Natalie Kershaw, she and I both actually started in archaeology, totally separate times together, because we both adore history. She's worked for over 20 years as a teacher in schools, colleges, alternative education, teaching a whole range of subjects, but especially teaching music. And she's a musician herself. She's been a musical director. She's consulted on a variety of musical events. She got her master's in music. And while we're doing this now, she's actually just about to submit her PhD to get her PhD in music through the University of Birmingham. And I know, as a fellow person who did a PhD, admittedly years, decades, ago, the PhD at this point in time is just all consuming, and you're always looking for something to actually like just give you a break and to distract you.
This is it.
This talk on musical practices during the English Civil War and the Interregnum is actually part of what she's delving into. She's essentially the world expert on her PhD topic. That is what being a PhD means, is that you're the world expert on a tiny, tiny little topic. But this is a great, tiny little topic. So her passion is music. Her aim has always been to make music and the arts accessible to everyone, inclusive of everyone, and frankly, just plain fun. So with that, I'm going to turn, oh no, first I'm going to tell you the structure and then I'll turn it over to Natalie. Natalie will be presenting for 45, 50 minutes or so. She's got great slides. She's got great music. And she's got something with Joan Baez in it. And that's what I really want to find out. And keep an eye out for when we start seeing how this music is actually contemporary music too. After she does her presentation, excuse me, around about 8ish or so, I will then start taking questions from the audience, especially from the chat. So as you have questions, put it into the chat. And I will be putting questions to Natalie. We'll do questions for around about 15, 20 minutes or so. Then I'll throw it back to Natalie for 2 or 3 minutes of just pulling it all together and summing it up. And then we'll get ready to end. But first, I'll tell you the fantastic events that we have coming up for the rest of the winter and into the spring, because we just got our King Philip's War 8-part series up, and we've got some other things coming up before that series, and it's really great. The partnership, as you may know, is an all-volunteer organization. We rely on donations for funding all of this, because at this point, we do not have any grants. We had a grant a few years ago, but that with all the federal grant stuff getting shrunken, the humanities grants getting shrunken, we have not gotten a grant. We rely on you. So keep that in mind. And if you love this, at the end, there'll be a way of donating. With that, let me turn this over to my friend Natalie, because this is just going to be grand. There you go. Take it away.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction, Roxanne. Thank you very much indeed. World expert, not quite sure yet, but I will work hard at being that. So, yes, so I am, this is part of my PhD research for the University of Birmingham. And as a historian and musician, I wanted to bring my two loves together and explore the question of what was the role of the musician in the 17th and 18th centuries. So, like today, music is such a normalized background noise that we seldom notice it. But who is playing? What are they playing? How did they learn to play? Those questions and the contradiction in the 17th century history I was taught at school versus the actual real historical facts got me to thinking. I'm exploring the role of the musician between 1650 and 1750, and there is a reason for that. Firstly, and I will discuss this a bit later, the publication of the English Dancing Master by John Playford in 1651 seemed contrary to what I was told at school about the life of a Puritan. And secondly, this is 100 years of chaos, of change, of innovation, everything at a societal level. Surely music, musical practices, and the musicians themselves would have been affected. So just a short terminology thing. ECW, I obviously mean the English Civil War. If I'm lazy and I say Civil War, I still mean the English Civil War. Where possible, I've used the Gregorian calendar for ease. I am concentrating on the 1640s and 1650s for this presentation, but I would like to say there's so much. There is absolutely tons to cover, even just in this 20 years itself. So I've tried to give you just an overall snapshot, just set the seeds, if you like, of something you can think about. And of course, Restoration and the long 18th century has its own musical soundscape. So hopefully this will work. Ah, there we go. Oh, no, go back. Digital and actual distance. Okay, so to answer Roxanne's question, why R. Joan? Why did I pick that one? And of course, you all asked that question. So I decided to start this presentation off with some popular 17th century songs that we still sing today and know today. I really like Joan's voice, so that's why I picked that one. But Dolly Parton's done it, Bob Dylan's done it, even the Everly Brothers have done this song. Sometimes it's called Barbara Allen, sometimes it's called Barbary Allen. This particular surviving broadside ballad sheet is dated around 1670, but the evidence is that it is a much earlier song. Broadsides were very popular and a means of relaying the latest tunes to the public. They didn't have music published, but would say, play to the tune of, which you might just be able to see on the image there. This shows how popular tunes would stay within the public collective, and we call that contrafactum. It's the same tune, but different words could be put to those tunes. Please do go down the rabbit hole and look at the websites listed here, and you will see just how many broadside ballads do use the same tunes. So very often tunes would have associations with the mood of a ballad or song. So for example, if a tune was brighter and the theme of the ballad was, upright and positive and all of that sort of thing, it would make sense. If it was more melancholy, the ballad invariably was a negative one. A good example would be the tune called Aim Not Too High. And if you go onto these websites and put that tune in, you will see which ballads use that tune. Aim Not Too High is also known as Fortune My Foe. So again, sometimes it can be tricky trying to chase where these tunes have come from. This particular tune was used in many ballads where the theme included a fall from grace or a tragedy of some sort. This tune was picked for a ballad about the execution of King Charles I. I think that's a particularly big theme of falling from grace. But how did the broadside ballads get about? How were they circulated? So it was by hawkers or traders. They would sell these ballads on very cheap paper, usually for around a penny. And the fact that they were intended to be musical ephemera just shows just to showcase the latest tunes or a snapshot in the musical taste at the time, or even the latest hit. It's no less than absolutely miraculous that they have survived at all. I have been in the archives and found broadside sheets, and I can see through them. So yes, it is an amazing resource to use. So the hawkers would sing the ballad or the tune, the latest tune, as a means to sell their wares. I think that's a bit of a free sample personally, and I like that. Inns, ale houses, and later on the coffee houses in the mid 17th century would often have a copy of the latest broadside ballad, resulting in a communal sing-song. Okay, so I shall move the slide. So before we listen to this song called Lily Bolero, the broadside called New Song and the Protestant Triumph, which you might just be able to see, they are the same tune. So this is an example of contrafactum. So it's the same tune, but they are different words. The lyrics on the track, though, are from New Song, which is from the Pepys collection.
Oh, brother, take us here the decree, Lily Bolero, Bullanala, that we shall have a new deputy, Lily Bolero, Bullanala, Lero, 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 Lily Bolero, Bullanala, Lero, 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 Lily Bolero, Bullanala. Oh, by my soul, it is a Talbot, Lily Bolero, Bullanala, and he will cut all the English throat, Lily Bolero, Bullanala, Lero, 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 Lily Bolero, Bullanala, Lero, 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 Lily Bolero, Bullanala. Though by my soul the English do prat, Lily Bolero, Bullanala, the law's on their side and Christ knows what, Lily Bolero, Bullanala, Lero, 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 Lily Bolero, Bullanala, Lero, 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 Lily Bolero, Bullanala. But it dispensed to come from the Pope.
Sorry, I was just stopping it a bit there because it carries on for quite a while after that. But that's just one example. But you can see there are other songs in the list that were still really popular. And actually, there was an awful lot of versions that are known today. So The Water is Wide, Eva Cassidy sang that. John Barleycorn, what do they call them? Steel Eye Span? Yeah, that band, they did all of these things. It's quite a folky tradition. Other songs we still sing, Greensleeves, Pastime with Good Company, Scarborough Fair, and one of the oldest songs that we have written down in England, Summer Is A-Coming In, is actually from 1260, and that is still sung today. So as already stated, tunes and their associations stayed in the public memory, creating that collective cohesion. As a result, certain words, certain tunes, certain songs would hold and retain those associations, whether they were political, allegorical, moral, bawdy, or any other category you can think of, they would continue to hold this meaning. Lily Bolero is a really good example because this tune itself became, and still is, to be honest, continues to have that association with triumph over one's enemy and rebellion and fighting for your rights and that sort of thing. Jeremy Collier was a churchman and theatre critic, amongst other things, and I'm sure it was an absolute barrel of fun because he stated in 1688 in his A Short View of the Immorality and the Profaneness of the English Stage that now why should it be in the power of a few mercenary hands to play people out of their senses, to run away with their understandings and wind their passions about the fingers as they list? Music is almost as dangerous as gunpowder, and it may be requires looking after no less than the press or the mint. 'tis possible a public regulation might not be amiss. I love that quote because it makes me feel quite powerful and rebellious, to be honest. Broadside ballads were a tool to spread messages and propaganda. They may not directly be about the current issue in the air, but very often they would use allegories or stories that society would have understood at the time to mean a specific thing. I mean, today, and this is not related to music, but if we said the word Jezebel, that has immediate connotations and biblical connotations as well. Whether we agree with it or not, the associations have persisted. So we're going to listen to these next two songs. So they're a little different to what we've done before. So A Coffin for Charles was written about April 1649, roughly 3 months after his execution. This one's a bit obvious. It is a little different though, because it has 3 voices. The first is the voice of Oliver Cromwell, who is the bad guy. The second verse is Charles I as the martyr in his grave. And the third verse represents the people of the country who are confused and upset at what has happened. It's absolutely, obviously royalist propaganda against the parliamentarians, of which Oliver Cromwell was the focus. It pushes the belief of the divine right of kings and asking for Charles II to come back to the throne. You can imagine in an alehouse or community setting that people would pick a voice and they would sing together. So let's have a listen.
So the deed is done, the royal head is severed, as I meant when I first begun, and strongly have endeavored. Now Charles I is tumbled down, the second I not fear. I grasp the scepter, wear the crown, nor for Jehovah care.
Think'st thou, base slave, though in my grave like other men I lie, my sparkling fame and royal name can, as thou wishest, die? No caitiff in my son I live, the Black Prince called by some, and he shall ample vengeance give to those that did me doom.
Suppressed, depressed, involved in woes, great Charles, thy people be. Basely deceived with specious shows by those that murder thee. We are enslaved to tyrants' hest, who have our freedom won. Our fainting hopes now only rest on thy succeeding son.
Baseball.
Okay, so yes, the message there is absolutely clear. This second song is called England New Bellmen, and it was written in 1652. This ballad rings true, and that's no pun intended, to the widely held belief of portents. So this is the year that England experienced one of the most frightening and visual portents of them all, a total solar eclipse. It was known as Black Monday, nothing to do with Black Friday, and was on the 29th of March in the Julian calendar, or the 8th of March in Gregorian. I managed to find out both dates. At a time when there had been huge amounts of upheaval and displacement, not just physically, but financially, emotionally, spiritually, on top of executing a king where many people believed to a certain extent that he was an emissary of God, that this was a sign of their wrongdoing and punishment. This also came on the back of several years of poor harvests and poor weather. So this ballad is a rise to action, to awake and understand that you have to make amends and recompense and become more godly in your manner and lifestyle. It is the only way to save your soul and country. The tune is simple, it is curt, and it is militaristic. So let's have a listen to this one.
Awake, awake, O England, sweet England, now awake, and to thy prayers speedily do thou thyself betake. The Lord thy God is coming within the sky so clear. Repent therefore, England, the day it draweth near. The dreadful day of vengeance is shortly now at hand, when fearful burning fire shall waste both sea and land, and all men's hearts shall fail them to see such things appear. Repent therefore, O England, the day it draweth near.
Lovely. So now I'm going to you. We are in London. It is the November 1657. Bells are ringing. There's a wedding. There is a grand salute in the background. There is a party underway. Music, clinking glasses, laughter. The father of the bride is enjoying his daughter's wedding with sack gossips, pipes, pranks, and dancing until 5 a.m. Whose wedding is this? So on Wednesday last was my Lord Protector's daughter married to the Earl of Warwick's grandson. Mr. Scobell, as a justice of the peace, tied the knot after a godly prayer made by one of His Highness's divines, and on the Thursday was the wedding feast kept at Whitehall, where they had 48 violins and 50 trumpets, and much mirth with frolics, besides mixed dancing, a thing heretofore accounted profane, till 5 of the clock yesterday morning. Amongst the dancers there was the Earl of Newport, who danced with Her Highness. This is Oliver Cromwell's daughter, Frances's wedding. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but aren't the Puritans and Cromwell against such lavish and musical weddings? This is a particularly surprising detail to most people. The Protectorate had been going since 1653, and Cromwell and his family were by now well embedded into the royal lifestyle. And there's no other way of putting it. There was no other way to run the country at this time. A king in all but name. The palaces were lived in by the Cromwells. They had guards, and they were on show just like any other royal family. Their apartments in the palaces were decorated with the latest colourful and lavish materials and textiles procured through Cromwell's Navigation Act and trading routes that had created. No sad colours there. Due to this lifestyle, his daughters, Mary and Frances, were brought up in the palaces with the benefits of any princess. As a result, and in keeping with that prevailing belief in the royalist way of governing, the girls were considered Puritan princesses. Frances's wedding highlights this. She married Robert Rich, a dynastic marriage, bringing aristocrats and the Cromwellian court together. In this sense, she was just like any other royal bride. She followed protocol and was married by the Justice of the Peace because the government had done away with ministers and clergy, so they couldn't perform marriages or baptisms. Then the next day, they had a massive knees up. But we do need to go back a few steps now. So how did we get to Frances's wedding? So I've just put a few key points here. There's so much more, but this is just a few key points here that would have affected musicians and music. So August 1642 is the official start of the English Civil War. 2nd of September in 1642, the theatres were closed. In June 1643, the licensing order came about, which suppressed the press. However, in 1644, John Milton, who was a prominent Puritan and Commonwealth poet, published Areopagitica, his essay on free speech in response to the licensing order. And he also wrote Of Education, where he demonstrates the importance of music and dancing. In January 1645, this is when the creation of the new model army came about, and it was also known as God's Army because they sung psalms. Now, obviously, 1642 closing the theatres didn't work, so they did something else in October 1647. So that was the suppression of the theatres. And this was also by the Lord Mayor of London, the Common Council, and the Justices of the Peace. So we've also got some of the Putney debates going on as well. 1648 was the Second English Civil War. And also in 1648, the original suppression didn't work. So now we had the utter suppression of the theatres with severe punishment. 1649, we know obviously the execution of Charles I. 1649 to 1653 was considered the period of the First Commonwealth. But by this point, 1653, Oliver Cromwell was proclaimed the protector of England. It became the protectorate. But of course, by 1660, Charles II returned back to England as king. So I thought it might be quite good to go over the different kinds of musicians that were recognised in the 17th century. So we had the waits, and these were civic musicians paid by the town or parish council. And depending on the area and the size of the area or towns or parishes that they were part of, they might be required to cover more than one area. They would signal the arrival of dignitaries. They would play for the town and parish officials, processions, and all of those sorts of town things and events that were going on. And this was usually a job for life. Technically, these ceased during the Civil War. However, there's always a however with this, Cambridge kept theirs going and had regular music concerts as well. Which are all in the records. So the cessation of these services or jobs didn't necessarily happen across the entirety of the country. Court musicians are exactly as it sounds. These musicians were considered the top of their musical game and would perform in court. They might have to play while the royal family ate. They had concerts and entertainments for the palace, visiting dignitaries. They were expected to play on demand and would no doubt have had a calendar of events and functions in which they had to perform in. This was usually a job where you replaced dead men's shoes, or it was a hereditary position from father to son. Of course, it's father to son. Theatre musicians, also as it sounds, played in theatres. So in 1660, when Charles II restored the theatres in London, he issued 2 royal patents for the theatres. And the court musicians doubled as theatre musicians. However, during Charles I and previous monarchs, the Palace Theatre, which is called the Cockpit in Whitehall, would have seen the royal musicians play for it in that capacity. Excuse me. But that's not a public theatre. That was only for the royals and invited people. So public theatres like the Globe or Salisbury Court Theatre had other musicians in there as well. So this actually suggests that there were a lot more musicians playing in public theatres than the initial restoration from the 1660s onwards. Military musicians. It was another kind of employment, also potentially for life if you've survived. Traditionally, instruments would have consisted of drums, trumpets, and fifes. Unlike the American Civil War, which popularized the idea of the drummer boy, the English Civil War drummer was typically an older man, was educated, meaning that he could read, write, and possibly, and this was always a bonus, could speak another language. And they were used to parley with the enemy, relay messages, commands across a loud, chaotic battlefield. And they were involved in negotiations. And this would have been a highly skilled job, plus needing to have basic fighting skills to defend yourself. Itinerant musicians. Now, itinerant musicians were a source of concern since medieval times, when the first Vagrancy Acts came into force. Musicians would travel from place to place to earn what money they could. And it wasn't just musicians, it would be all sorts of traders. With that, though, there were associations. So crime and other negative overtones remained attached to itinerant musicians. terminology is not always clear when you're trying to do search for this in the archives and that sort of thing. So actually, instead of being called a violin, like we might recognize today, they were called fiddler. So you have to be very careful what you're searching for. Music making in the home was a very common pastime, whether it was with instruments, just voice, or a mixture of both. There are numerous pieces of evidence in Pepys's diary and also of Evelyn's diary. John Evelyn, however you want to pronounce it, with snippets of, and we played a while. It's a really common phrase. Each person would have a part book. And you can just see, if you look on the colour image on the slide, you can just see these little books on the table. And unlike a full score or a libretto, which would only contain one part of the music, occasionally you would find a table book, a single book, where the music would be written on each side of the music. So wherever you stood on the table, you would be able to read your music the correct way up. And they would be labelled treble, basso, etc. I've already alluded to communal singing that took place in alehouses, inns and coffee houses. But any vehicle for bringing large groups of people together has always been and still is an issue to the authorities. There are concerns of the spread of ideas, immorality, sedition, dissenting, and anything that might threaten the current powers that be. And this goes back to songs and music having their associations that we mentioned earlier. So I've listed a few things, just a few key items that were published in the 1640s. Far from being stopped, publishing did continue, albeit by favoured people that visibly supported the current government. That said, there were hundreds and hundreds of pamphlets being published all the time about religion, anti-Catholic, anti-this, anti-that, anti-Charles, vindication for the Civil War, the parliamentarians, and so on. So there was just constant stream of these very small, thin pamphlets with people's opinions in them, essentially. Broadside ballads, as we know, continued to be created and sold by the hawkers, and occasional new plays came out. However, we know that the theatres were suppressed and closed, theoretically. So while they were published, they were not expected to be performed. And many families, if they had the means, would perform in the privacy of their own home. So in the 1650s, in order to satiate the public need for entertainments and pastimes, many of the older plays, from Shakespeare to plays all the way up to the 1630s, were regularly republished. Cromwell continued the royal masque tradition in court, and James Shirley's 1653 Cupid and Death was performed for the Portuguese ambassador. And also, what set this entire thing off for me, John Playford's The English Dancing Master was also published in 1651. So how did musicians and performers respond to the suppression? Well, many performances, like I've just said, went into private homes. As long as they were not asking for money or obviously selling tickets, then it was fine. This was mostly the rich and elite who had the means to do it and quite obviously, the space. But I have found evidence in the form of a local petition to try and stop plays being performed in an alehouse during the 1650s in Lancashire in North England. And it just goes to show it doesn't matter what the government have tried to do. People are still putting on plays. They are still entertaining themselves. And we just find these little tiny snippets of, let's try and suppress this alehouse, or there might be a very small court record of an innkeeper because he had put on a droll or something like that. So performances adapted the parameters of their art, if you like, or their craft, while trying to remain within the law. Inadvertently, this created new or improved art forms. A droll, I just mentioned that, is actually a sketch or a small scene. It could be comedic. And as long as it wasn't too much like a play, then that was also okay as well. As a result, some actors were performing in London up until 1649. It was then that the soldiers gutted several theatres to stop any performances at all. William Davenant's Siege of Rhodes in 1656 was held at his house, Rutland House, and he got through the red tape of government by saying it was a moral play and highly appropriate, and the score was not too lavish. Recitative music was acceptable. By the mid-1650s, while there were still plots against Cromwell and plans to bring back Charles II, for society and the musicians, there appears to have been the teeniest, tiniest glimpse of optimism around normal life again. And this can be seen in 1654, when the first May Day celebration brought out more people than it had done since the Civil War. So one newspaper writes, May the 1st was more observed by people going a-maying than for diverse years past, and indeed much sin committed by wicked meetings with fiddlers, drunkenness, and the like. I mean, there's that association again with itinerant fiddlers. They enjoy wicked meetings. I'll let you decide what that means. It just sounds like a normal let your hair down kind of knees up, to be honest. This is the same in the Lord Mayor shows in 1656, which played music down the Thames. In September 1657, Barbara von Becker, who we have a picture there, came to play the harpsichord in London. Now, she wasn't part of a freak show as such, and she is represented in this portrait very much as a lady, but you can see she suffered from, I think you pronounce it, hypertrichosis. But she was married and she had children, and she traveled all over Europe playing the harpsichord. But along with Barbara von Becker, there was an acrobat simply just called the Turk. And he was doing rope tricks, tightrope walking and the like. And then John Evelyn wrote in his diary that all the women there were far too painted and looked like prostitutes. Another negative connotation there. Southwark had opened more than it had before, and its Bear Garden, and Hyde Park was open to the public at this point. In 1658, Davenant even managed to convince the Master of Revels, Sir Henry Herbert, and Cromwell that his semi-opera, The Cruelty of the Spaniard, would be a good propaganda tool against the Spanish. Cromwell heartily endorsed this, so again proves that he understood the power of performance and its function to spreading ideas. So where did Cromwell sit with his music? And rule for one and not for the other kind of mess that appears to be going on all at the moment. Arguably, we might say pragmatism rather than big picture viewpoint. He enjoyed music a lot. He employed John Hinxton as his master of music. Hinxton also educated Cromwell's daughters, Mary and Frances. And while Cromwell would never tolerate the use of music in the church itself, and there isn't a lot of evidence at this time and place about the church practices of Cromwell, but he did love other music. He did enjoy listening to Latin motets composed by Richard Deering. And they are gorgeous to listen to. So if you go onto Dr. Google and just put in this composer's name and just put Latin motets, and you will come across some really lovely examples. But these are Catholic, and they were for Henrietta Maria. So that hypocrisy in spiritual matters cannot be more obvious. However, it is an argument for music that it transcends all worldly ties and speaks to us universally, whatever the association. However, during this time, there was a lot of anti-Catholic feeling, and broadside ballads bolstered that feeling as well. Now, to come full circle to Frances's wedding, 48 violins and 50 trumpets is an awful lot of musicians, and shows that the musicians and the quality of musician required for this gig was still going strong. It is likely that they had their own network and community. And to put it into perspective, Charles II had 24 violins based on his French cousin's style of music. Cromwell had double that number and trumpeters to boot. I mean, this was for a single event. However, it shows that there was a willing and a massive pool of musicians as needed. So we're going to do some dancing now. And I wanted to share 3 of the most popular country dances that were around. And they are in the 1651 Playford book, The English Dancing Master. And I've started with Cuckolds All in a Row. And it's first because in 1662, at the Charles II ball, one of the many entertainments he threw at the palace, Pepys described it as the old dance of England. So it shows its age and popularity. And Playford did not create these dances or the tunes. He collected them over years and oral tradition of the music being passed down. And he just collated it for this book. So after the traditional minuet in a ball, French style, of course, this was the first dance that Charles II started with. The country dances are meant to be communal, easy to learn, cheeky in places, and repetitive in nature. Now, just a side note, that is actually a very sedate version of Cuckolds All in a Row. And I have seen many more raucous versions of it and lots of partner swapping and also bottom bumping on the dozy does. So that was actually a very nice educational video there, but it can get a bit bonkers at times. So Jenny Pluck Pears, and try saying that 7 times quickly, is another popular tune in Playford and repeats throughout the many editions. And I'd like to profoundly thank the Historical Dance Society and its chair, Lynn Spicer, for allowing me to use these next 2 videos. The HDS are amazing. And if you're interested in historical dance, they do everything, particularly in England and Europe, they do everything from medieval to Victorian. So do check out their website and other YouTube videos that they've done. So Jenny Pluck Pears, here we go. So I'm just going to stop there because they repeat it. This is a cheekier dance than it looks. Firstly, the ladies go in the middle and the men pluck them. Then it swaps to the ladies with the men in the middle and the ladies pluck them. But this video has only got 3 couples in as a demonstration. But if there are more of you, you are more likely to end up with a different partner. So I think this dance could be a lot of fun. So the third and final dance I'm going to show you today, and it's another very popular tune, is something called Gathering Peas Cods. And I shall explain that after the video. It's quite a simple round dance. And what I haven't said actually is, if you look, and I'm holding my pen as though you can see it now, this is my teacher head, but if you look at the top of the Playford page there, and it says round for as many as will, and then you've got this like a little moon and a little circle with a dot in the middle, well, that represents the ladies and the men. And they're all in a circle together. And round for as many as will, just get as many people involved as you can in the dance. So I should have mentioned that. What I really like about Playford is he also puts instructions in to the book as well. So, you know, go all 2 doubles round, then back again, turn, men hands and go round on the inside and come to your places. And he's got his own code. And sometimes when you're doing this, actually the funniest thing is actually trying to work out what he's saying. So Our Lady's full moons or crescent moons, they are full moons. The men are crescents. Just so you know. Thanks, Roxanne. So I will play this video and I will tell you what a peas cod is. So I know they were wearing Elizabethan costumes, but they just danced to everything. So don't worry, it's all in Playford. But you can see in that video with larger number of people, you do end up in different places. So both men and women have their parts to play in the dance. But this is a way to meet other people as well, whether you wanted to or not. Now I'll tell you what a peas cod is. So firstly, it is a pea pod, you know, the green pea pods that we know. But in the 17th century, it was also part of a gentleman's doublet. So you may have seen some images where the doublets might protrude a little at the front, but it's in the shape of a pea pod. So if you Dr. Google that again, you'll see what I mean. And actually, James I's portrait is the first that comes up. It's a very famous image of him. So when we're talking about gathering peas cods, what exactly are we harvesting here? So that's another question. So in all the dances I've shown you, despite the ladies and gentlemen performing in them, each one has rather a racy meaning. And this went from public to indoors. So attitudes towards musicians employed by the court. So they were varied, with class and societal position being key to where they would be placed. So I said they could be employed by the court. But likewise, we've also just seen some evidence about the itinerant fiddlers, violin players, that were really, really looked down upon. But I hope to have demonstrated that despite what we've been told, i.e. Charles I lost his head and the entirety of England went under a blanket of silence and prayer, that this was simply not the case. Music was needed in daily lives as much as anything to function, to serve a purpose and keep people busy in the evenings. Alehouses and palaces had equal need for musicians. And somehow they kept going and flouting the rules. And as we theatricals like to say, the show must go on. So the English Civil War is as divisive now as it was then, and it infected many people, industries, and lives. But despite the laws and acts, music continued to be played. Musicians and performers were resilient and continued to find ways to stay within the law without stopping their craft, whatever the opinion of them was. And this is only a snippet of everything. And each section that I've tried to cover to give you a really good general overview, so much more to explore. So please do go down that rabbit hole. So yes, that's all good stuff. So I'd like to say thank you for your time this evening. I've already seen some questions popping up. So yes, if you've any more questions, please do ask me. Thank you.
That was great.
Oh,
This brought back all sorts of memories for me of, I used to be part of the Society for Creative Anachronism, and we did Gathering Peas Cods.
It's
so
do you know, it's one of those tunes, it stays in your head. I was whistling it all day.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We called it Gathering Cod Pieces when we were joking around. Although I did just look up peas cod, and it's actually the stomacher, at least according to.
Yeah, precisely.
It's not the cod piece, but we called it Gathering Cod Pieces. And we danced it rather raucously and rowdily. So
as it should be.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We also did a dance that I don't remember the actual name of, but we called it the bunny hop because it was hopping. It was going hop, 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 and you can hear it in the music. And whenever I hear that music, I just want to do the 3 little hops like a bunny. So these dances are very much alive today.
Yes.
And indeed, people were starting to ask questions about the dances. Looks like you've been also able to see the chat. People wondering with the dances, here in the United States, we have square dances where they're called, where the caller will call out the next step, which is really handy if you don't have a good memory for the dance.
Yeah.
Were dances ever called at that point, or did people memorize?
It was a mixture. It was a mixture of things. So if you had a smaller gathering where you might have had, say, just one fiddle player or a violin player, I should really say in today's terms, but they would play and call at the same time. And so And actually, it was one of these things where I suppose if you're in the upper echelons, they wouldn't have called at all. But if you were in the lower echelons and it could have been some sort of celebration or village celebration, there is evidence where it was just, oh, yeah, and the fiddler called and that sort of thing. So it was quite common. Yeah, exactly. If you can play and talk at the same time, which I'm rubbish at doing, by the way. Yeah, but that's what happened. Yeah. So, and some dances were just expected to be known because they were so common. Some people didn't feel the need. So things like the gathering peas cods, for example, circle, circle, men go in and circle, circle, ladies bob. And, you know, it's that sort of thing. It's quite a relatively simple dance. So that wouldn't have been called. But then on the other hand, they would have had sort of terminology and say, you know, I mean, I know I joke in aside where I said that on the dozy does, but that's because I call them dozy does because everybody knows what a dozy do is, and the bottom bumps that go with it if it's been a bit cheekier and raucous. But it's a similar thing. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, just a lot of fun. And
Oh, yes, Michelle, it absolutely is the fun part, trying to work it out. And did you see at the end of that video? Now, you would have seen, I mentioned Lynn Spicer, and she was the one with the top hat as in the Elizabethan one. She's the chair of HDS, and she's got that, oh, ridiculous memory. She'll say, I'll do this dance, and she can just do it because she's got that memory. So she doesn't really need a lot of calling. Somebody like me who sometimes plays, sometimes dances it, I can't remember anything, to be honest. So I need the calling, or she'll shout, shout the next step. But at the end, it got so raucous and they were giggling and the circle got bigger and the gaps got wider and they were all laughing.
And that's the fun bit
About it. And I thought, this is exactly what it would have been like. It wasn't a performance, you know, to a certain extent.
When did people start dance? Actually, first the hat question. One person was saying, I was shocked to see men dancing while wearing hats. Do you happen to know in the costuming or the clothing of the period, did men regularly wear their hats all the time? He's wondering if that was done in the 17th century, because a century later, wearing your hat while dancing would not have been apparently.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the size of your wig.
Oh.
Yeah, truly. It's actually just like a little, because obviously you see Charles II, and I'll use him as the really obvious example because he's known for this humongous, yeah, the curly look. So yeah, so if you wear your hair in plaits and you suddenly take it out, I said it's the Charles II look. But it's that sort of thing. Yes, out and about, of course, you'd have worn a hat because that was expected. But when you were dancing, not really. In the 17th century, in the Elizabethan times, very often when you were bowing and you had hats, you would have done that to the lady, put the hat back on, and then done your dancing. But it was like a sign of respect that you've done that. So it does vary. And do you know what? I was reading something the other day where it was in Cromwell's time, and it might even have been at Francis's wedding, and it was somebody who was around in James the first time, and he basically looked Elizabethan in dress, and he continued, he danced with a sword and his hat. And it was mentioned that he danced with a sword, because obviously, you know, that's not or de rigueur, is it really, to dance?
And you probably hit people as you're
precisely. So it was mentioned how archaic this particular gentleman looked, but he refused to change because, you know, that was his style and he stuck to it.
And Michelle's commenting, I think there were traveling dance masters with portable fiddles, maybe, who would call out the steps. Yeah, that was the confusion one. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And a lot like modern contra dancing, which is done here in New England a lot, where you're supposed to know the steps, but sometimes you don't. I'm not a good contra dancer because I always forget how to do it. When did people start dancing? Were they dancing as children, or was it something that you were doing as you were an adult or what we would call today, late teens?
No, it was all the time. It was because it was such a common pastime. It's just what you did. It's like, I'm trying to think of something modern equivalent today, but I suppose it's just something you would do. It was part of your everyday life. It was so normal to do. You wouldn't have thought twice about it.
Right.
Now, so obviously in the very lower echelons in your villages and things, you wouldn't have had that much time to dance, but that didn't mean it didn't happen and they weren't doing it and that sort of thing. Of course, we tend to think of the upper echelons of society where they had all of the time in the world and all the best dancing masters to do all of that with. But no, it was such a common pastime. So when go back to that music making slide and I showed you there was that table and they had those little part books, obviously your lower classes, and I hate using the word class, but I have to just to differentiate, they wouldn't have had that. They may have had a book in the parish which they all shared, or they learned through oral tradition, and well, they definitely learned through oral tradition. Whether or not they played, most of it would have been vocal, I imagine, or rudimentary instrumentation, that sort of thing. Right. But certainly dancing and music playing, singing it was just your lifestyle.
Just what you did. Was Playfair's book intended for people to learn dances from, and were people who were gentlemen, gentle ladies, as somebody put here, were they learning dances from Playford, or?
Well, there was always adaptations, and the one thing Playford was so good at doing was finding a trend and selling his books. So he is a businessman, don't forget this. He is a businessman and he's finding out what is happening. So Playford did know Pepys. He did know all of these very famous people that we now know today through their diaries and things like that. Pepys often says, "Oh, I went to Playford's today," or whatever, the book in the temple and that sort of thing, which I believe would have been near what is now St. Paul's Cathedral in London. But yeah, it was just, he was a businessman. And so he collected these things. He had a particular passion for music and dancing himself. And I think that helps the fact that I think there's about, I can't remember, is it 18 or 19 editions of Playford Dancing Master? And some of the dances survive and some of them don't because they go in and out of trends. But things like Cuckolds All in a Row and Gathering Peace Cods, that just continues because they're just so popular and enjoyable to do. And I think because of the relative simplicity of them, they just stood the test of time.
Were all classes dancing the same dances, or were certain dances more court dances, and did they differ from what the peasantry would be dancing?
Absolutely did, yeah. The elite always want to be elite and will always do their own thing. So the country dances were actually considered very, very lower class dances to do. And yet all of the upper classes were doing them. So it was this funny juxtaposition of societal norms, if you like, it's the way it is. But so I'm thinking, so Tomlinson, Kellam Tomlinson, but this is 18th century. He wrote the most beautiful, and I didn't mention in this because it obviously wasn't 1640s, 50s, but he wrote the most beautiful 18th century book on minuets. He was a dancing master and he was absolutely the biggest snob you've ever read in your life. You read the opening pages and he put, the coarse country dances that people are doing. So I suppose I'd better mention them. It's like, excuse me, people enjoy it. Just lighten up, man. But he was very much into the French minuet. And that was the elite dancing. I can't help feeling how boring it must have been, actually, because the minuet, I've done a very basic minuet. I'm not a dancer, I'm a musician, but obviously I do like to I throw myself into things. And I did this minuet, and you have to stand there with your partner, and you have to do this in front of all the people because no one else can dance while you're doing the minuet because they have to watch you. So there is a societal order in which you do the minuet. So obviously it started with the king or whoever the highest person in the room was, and then it worked your way down. So you were always being reminded where your position was in society just through that dance. And then once you'd done the minuet and you'd showed off to everybody, then, you know, like Tomlinson said, you might do some country dances, whatever, if you want. But it was in vogue, and that's what people wanted to do. And like I say, Charles II loved his cuckolds all in a row, because
He was a rowdy, yeah, he was a rowdy king.
he was very bawdy. I think we can use the word bawdy with him.
With lots of mistresses and just a good fun guy.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So he wanted fun dances, so why not? So I did the minuet, but now I'm doing cuckolds all in a row because I want to.
And it's the country dances that have really survived as people are still doing them today.
Absolutely. And they do adapt, and people will say, oh, I didn't do that step. Or one lady said to me, so for example, a minuet, quite often you're on your tippy toes and you go 1, 2, 3, and you sort of do a little lower and then 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to see people see me in the camera. 1, 2, 3. But actually, and they do a little lift on the third. That's the English way. I discovered that the French way is actually the second beat. So you go 1 up, down. On the second, so you go 1, 2, 3, and you stay down on the third beat. And that's the French way. So when I was learning this minuet in this workshop I did, there was a couple of people who'd learned the French way and the English way, and I could see how this was getting a bit divided in the room, you know, because I was like, well, my way's better, you know, whatever. But it was actually, there was no way that was better. I think just stylistically, it was just trying to, you know, my way's English, my way's French.
And are they danceable together, or do people get confused if their partner is going up on the step that they're going down on?
That's it, exactly. Yeah. That is it, exactly. So this is what, so I, you know, it's like, so I'm dancing with this lady and she was the man and I was just sort of like hopping along, trying to do my best. And then suddenly she's bobbing up and I'm thinking, oh, should I be doing that? You know, and it was, yeah, so it can get complicated. So if you're going to do a minuet together, guys, just decide 2 or 3.
The tunes, so the dances continue today, and they're still popular amongst many people. And Society of Creative Anachronism and the historical Dance Society are absolutely doing them. The songs and tunes, though, continue too. I realized I sang "The Water Is Wide" in middle school chorus when I was 12. So I can probably do the alto part, and that's about it. And you don't want to hear me sing it. But these songs have continued down, Joan Baez, and they've become popular again.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And you're seeing more and more musicians exploring different genres of music now as well. So it's not just one style, it's all, and I think there's more of an appreciation and an awareness that they exist, and that, and also I think it helps, and speaking as historians as well, there's that need now to record and to save these practices that we've always done, you know. So there's all of these you know, I don't know if you've ever done this in sort of where you are in America or whatever, but it's just that thing of recording. Somebody might just be telling you a story and it's recording them, and it's just keeping that history alive, and it's talking history or whatever you might,
oral history.
Yeah, and that's all it is, but it's just recording. And you know, I'm going to show this book to people, that this Jeremy Barlow's awesome book. So this is all the Playford tunes in the book, and I'll just sort of just flick, for example. I've just opened up at a random page, but he's made that into very readable music for anybody to learn. And there's also all sorts of so there's opera songs in here, and there's the popular tunes that people wanted to know at the time, you know. So some of them not necessarily broadside ballads type of songs, although I imagine they transferred as well, depending which volume it was published in. But all of these things they're all there now. You just got to know that they are there, and just
go look for them.
Go for them, play with them. You know, that's what they're there for.
I was struck by the painting you showed of people, you know, playing around the table, the color painting, where they were looking at music sheets. How many people knew how to read music? it's a literacy skill that
Mhm.
I don't have. And when I tried in fourth grade to learn the trumpet, they assumed I knew how to read music, and I was just flummoxed.
Yeah.
Was reading music a relatively common form of literacy, or was it not? Was it different type of musical scores than we're used to?
A lot of it. So I've got a music book and it's 18th century and it's a bit later in the 18th
Yeah.
century. And he was called Joshua Jackson. And Joshua Jackson was a violin player, but he was also a mill owner. So it was from where I'm from, sort of up north in England. And he he wanted to be a full-time musician, but he also had a family business. So he kind of dabbled in both. He had that annoying ability to learn a piece of music and then write it down afterwards, or write it down as they were playing. So we have this spectacular record of him doing that, but that was by ear. So actually, some of the tunes, when I've looked at them, I thought that note sounds a bit funky there. And it's written down verbatim. It's a brilliant publication.
It's a
But
form of oral. It's a
yeah,
form of recording like we do today.
now
And you
it's just so
talking
happened
about
exactly, but it's just so happens that because his family, they weren't very rich, but they weren't poor, so he had some education, which meant a little bit of music as well, a bit of rhetoric, a bit of all the things, maths, all of those things that were part of the education system then. But it was still unknown for lower classes. They would have learnt it orally, traditionally. If many of the education centres, they would have had just maybe a spinster lady, a widow lady, somebody who just ran a school for the younger kids, and that was it. And you were limited by her knowledge or his knowledge, whoever was doing
But
it.
it sounds like musical literacy, being able to read and or potentially also write, if you're really unusual, musical notation was a more common form of literacy than we happen to have musical literacy today.
I think quite
Yeah.
possibly, and certainly, if not literacy itself, ear.
Yeah.
So that people could pick up tunes
Right.
quicker. Because I know some people who are just like, oh, it's this. And I sit there going, no, I need to hear it a couple more times. just give me a minute. And so I think it's just one of those things, we're so used to now having music on tap, we don't really hone in
Right.
anymore because it's just there.
Right.
Whereas they wanted to learn. It's like, that's a nice tune. Let me listen harder and take it in more. And that's what they did. So again, that oral tradition. I'm not saying they didn't have their own ways of notation,
Right.
and memory, sort of like creating their own little memory things of, oh, this is what
Right.
the tune did.
Yeah. Mnemonic devices to
Yeah, so
remember how to
that
do
sort
the
of
tune.
thing, exactly. But there was certainly, literacy was certainly the upper echelons again.
Yeah. But I'm intrigued. It's a new thought for me, and I really love having new thoughts through these
Oh, good.
presentations, which is I'd not thought of music as a form of literacy. We
Mm.
have mathematical literacy, musical literacy. Clay Curtis is commenting, and in colonial America, there was the tradition of shape note singing. Did shape note singing exist? Does or did it exist?
We have
It,
some medieval um, notation where there's two kinds. You've got the traditional, and I'm sorry I don't have any examples to show you,
yeah,
but it's like big square blocks, and there's like four lines, and they would have had square blocks, not necessarily this is a G, this is an F, or whatever, nothing like that specifically, but you knew wherever the cantor started. So we're going to start on this note. They would go from that note and move along with it. Now, in some of the medieval texts, there are literally lines and just these little things. And in some medieval texts, you will see just these little bits of ink across the words and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure exactly if it's the same as what you're saying in the question, but
right.
there were visual ways of,
Cues,
yes, exactly. Not necessarily, e.g. BDF like we have
yeah,
today. That sort of
which I
thing.
can't read at all.
Yeah.
But I can at least say, oh, that goes up, that goes down.
That's it exactly. I was about to say, but I bet you know the difference.
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah.
And still can't do it well, but love doing it. So this is just marvelous exploration of stuff. Do you have any concluding remarks or comments that you want to make? And oh, Clay, who actually is a fiddler
Mm.
violinist, I know Clay, was saying shape notes were intervals, not specific notes.
Yeah, no, I don't. I've never come across that personally.
Yeah, you should
You,
look.
yes.
You'd be fascinated by the shape note singing
Yeah.
tradition, which is still very much an ongoing tradition.
Ah,
Oh yeah, shape note. Go. So you
yeah.
get to Google it
I'm
afterwards
going to
instead of
Dr.
going to
Google
sleep.
that now and see what that is. Yeah, that
No, it's
sounds
very cool. It's very, very cool. Any concluding thoughts or remarks?
just very briefly that the subject around the English Civil War and its effect on cultural aspects of our lives, it's really not black and white. It did not happen across the country. It depended on people and, how, yes, you can still support the government and the current government, but you can still enjoy and ease up. And as long as it wasn't public and obvious, it didn't stop. But then again, like I said, you can see from 1650s onwards, I mean, they'd stopped May Day in 1640s, and suddenly, 10 years later, they've come out again because they feel safe to do so,
Mhm.
and that sort of thing. So to me, that's quite just one little thing. It was not blanket across England at all by any stretch. And the north was different to the south, as it still is today, and the east was different to the west. And it all depended who was in charge and how much they enjoyed their own music to how much they wanted to stop it or to continue it. I imagine there's a lot of unrecorded, we'll let it slide kind
Right.
of things going on. So that's all I want to say is that it isn't black and white. There's so many nuances going on in the country at that time, and it wasn't all the same. Even if they wanted it to be, it wasn't.
And we're still doing the songs and dances today, somewhat modified through time because that's what time does, but they're still utterly enjoyed today by people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like Collier said, music is as powerful as gunpowder. So I love it.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you so much. This was a great, great
Oh, I'm so
presentation.
pleased. Thank you.
Yeah, no, this was just a lot of fun. So, and Natalie, by the way, reached out to the partnership and said, "Hey, I got some stuff I want to share with you." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, yes, you bet." And I'm so glad you reached out
Oh,
to
thank you
us.
so much.
Just delighted that you reached out. Let me now say a little bit about what we have coming up with the Partnership of Historic Bostons. We've got a whole lot of stuff. The first or the next rather event is presentation by Samuel Fullerton on Hugh Peter and the Orphans. And I'm sorry, I'm at work, so I've got a computer screen over here that I'm looking at. And this is basically royalists. This is more of the Civil War. Was it fake news? Royalists saw only the devil whispering, "You're mine," in former Salem minister's Hugh Peters' ear. And we're looking at the 17th century conspiracy theory. Oh my God, they had conspiracy theories then too. As the royalists were marshaling the power of print media to tar Hugh Peters' benevolent project, helping London orphans, sending homeless London orphans to here in New England. So we're looking at how Hugh Peters helped homeless orphans or sent them over to New England, and others were saying that this was not the right thing to do. So do sign up for that on Wednesday, February 11th. That has been up for a little bit for you to sign up on. We have also the book club is continuing in February with reading of The Passion of Anne Hutchinson. And just up on the Partnership of Historic Boston's website is our series on King Philip's War and King Philip's or Metacomet's resistance here in the warfare between Native peoples and the colonizers, the colonists, the Puritans, and others. We are doing an 8-part series that Sarah Stewart and others here in the partnership have put together, and you need to look at this. It starts Wednesday, March 11th, with an introduction to the unknown war, and then it goes into we're both Zooming and hybrid live at the Cambridge Public Library in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We will have panelists and Native people talking. We're looking at the slavery, the slavery that Native peoples were forced into with King Philip's War, surviving slavery, another book club event with Whose Story, erasure, history, and memory in archives, and it's just going to be fantastic. So take a look, please, at that. And as I said, the Partnership of Historic Bostons is entirely run on donations. We volunteer our time. And King Philip's War that we're doing, we actually don't have funding for this at all. But we just got so excited with what we can put together, and the fact that it's the 400th anniversary, I believe, or 350th anniversary of that, basically the worst warfare in New England and the United States history in terms of lives lost. It's the 350th anniversary. So we're putting together this series. We would love donations because we want to try to pay our presenters a little bit of an honorarium, and we're scraping together the funds. But if you like what you see, donate, and do continue with us through the winter, through the spring, because we love working with you. Natalie, thank you so much. This was just great. Yes, you're very welcome. We loved what you were presenting to us.
Thank you.
With that, we'll see each other, folks. I'm actually going to head home from work now. I'm in downtown Boston, and I'm going to head home now that it is 7:30 here. And Natalie, hopefully, is going to relax, maybe look up shape notes, and she's going to go to bed because it's 5 hours later in England at the moment. Bye-bye there, good people.